Hello and welcome to this session, and in this session we shall continue our understanding of programming through pattern programming. That way, in my previous session you had understood that this program had indeed given us a square of 5 stars. But then in my previous session I had not yet communicated to you as to why really my loop index variables I and j should not start with 1 but should rather start with 0. Firstly, I shall be providing you with that required clarity, after which in this session I shall be proceeding and telling you as to how really we can be creating a rectangle of stars. But then firstly, why should really the loop index variables start from 0 and not from 1? Let me explain. Consider this to be the output screen or the console. Well, it is on this screen that you shall be getting the required output. But then what you also have to understand is that this screen is organized in the grid format or a mesh format like this. Yes, definitely this grid or mesh is invisible to you, which is why you did not know it maybe all this while, but then whatever you are going to be printing on the screen shall get printed in those small cells. But then what is really the correlation between the output screen having this grid and why are we really supposed to be starting our loop index variable with 0? Well, if really that is the doubt at the back of your mind, let me tell you that this happens to be our initial column. This happens to be the next column. This happens to be the column after that, and so on. But then what you really have to understand is that the column number of this first column is not 1, rather it is 0. And then the next column is the column 1. The column after that is the column 2. And that way the column numbers are organized on this console. Similarly, this happens to be our initial row, but then this row is not going to be having a number starting from 1. Rather, this happens to be the row 0. Similarly, the next row happens to be the row 1. The row after that happens to be the row 2, and this way the rows are organized. So you can easily notice that on the console, what we now have is a grid or a mesh-like structure whose numbering begins from 0 and not from 1. And this is precisely the reason as to why our loop index variables also have to be starting from 0 and not from 1. Well, that way, for the columns, I have made use of the loop index variable j, and for the row, I have made use of the loop index variable I. Well, now if you would look back at the program, if you really want, I can replace I with row like this. And obviously in the declaration also I need to be replacing this I with row. Similarly, wherever j is present, I can also replace it with column, and obviously I will also have to make that change in the declaration. And upon execution, do we really get the required output? Of course, we would get the required output. So why really am I renaming this as row and column, and how really does this nested loop execute? Let me explain. In as far as this nested loop is concerned, you know that this inner loop is actually going to be printing 5 stars and then takes the cursor to the new line. Well, this is something that you have already previously understood. But then now this has been placed inside this outer loop. And what is really the outer loop telling the system? After all, I am initializing the value of row to 0, and then after initialization, the condition check happens, wherein I would check if the value of the row is less than or equal to 4. Obviously, the value of row is 0, which is less than or equal to 4, and since the condition is satisfied, I shall be coming in. And you know this inner piece of code is going to be printing 5 stars like this, and then it takes the cursor to the new line. And once that activity is done, obviously, the control will not come out of the loop, rather it goes back to row plus plus, meaning that the value of row shall get incremented from 0 to 1. And then again the condition check happens, wherein row less than or equal to 4 becomes 1 less than or equal to 4. Obviously, 1 is less than 4, due to which the condition is satisfied, and since the condition is satisfied, again this piece of code gets executed, and you know what it does. After all, it is going to print 5 stars in that row, and then it takes the cursor to the new line. And then again after that, you know that the control cannot be coming out of the loop, rather it goes back to the incrementation, and due to the incrementation, the row value gets incremented from 1 to 2. And then the condition would be checked. Obviously, row less than or equal to 4 becomes 2 less than or equal to 4, and since 2 is less than 4, that the condition is satisfied, and hence the control re-enters the loop. And you know that once this piece of code gets executed, that in that row, meaning in the second row, that we would be printing 5 stars, and then the cursor comes to the new line. This way, as the loop proceeds, you know that for the row 3 as well, 5 stars will be printed and the cursor shall be taken to the new line, and then for the row 4 as well, 5 stars would be printed and the cursor shall be taken to the new line. And after that, again, when the row value is incremented, it becomes 5. And then when the condition is checked, then obviously the row less than or equal to 4 becomes 5 less than or equal to 4, and you know that mathematically 5 is neither less than 4 nor is equal to 4, due to which the condition fails, and hence the control comes out of the outer loop as well. But by then, you can notice that on the output screen, you would have got the required result. So all said and done, I'm sure now through this, you have again been able to understand that this program shall give us the required output. Well, that way, you have also understood that the names of the loop index variables really doesn't matter. Whether I make use of the names I, J, K, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, row, column, whatever is the name that I would be making use for the loop index variable really doesn't matter. Rather, the art is in setting up the loops and writing the code inside the loop so that you get the required geometric pattern. And all said and done, I'm sure now you understand that the outer loop is controlling the row, the inner loop is controlling the column, and the code inside that is what is enabling us to print the stars, and then print /n obviously is used to take the cursor to the new line. The positioning and the arrangement of these control constructs is what you have to really gain control over, and the moment you gain control over these control constructs, that you can actually create whatever kind of pattern that you would wish to create. Now that you have understood all of this, what is really the story in case of Java? What is really the story in case of Python? Let me explain. In as far as Java is concerned, you know that this line of code is going to be printing a single star on the screen. But then if I would need a line of 5 stars, then this is the for loop that shall help me to do that. Well, I can have the index as 1 to 5, but then you know that I would be having it from 0 to 4 for the reasons that I have already told you. Also, the loop index variable need not be J. I can also be calling it as column. Well, that way you know that this piece of code is no doubt going to print 5 stars on a single line, but then the cursor would be blinking in the same line. So after printing 5 stars, my responsibility is to bring this cursor to the new line, and that is the reason why I have this statement which shall ensure that after printing 5 stars, that the control shall come to the new line. But then you also know that I am not trying to be printing a line of 5 stars, rather I want a square of 5 stars. So that way this piece of code needs to be repeatedly executed, and hence I bring in another for loop. Well, here again I can call the loop index variable as row, and also I can be having the initial value as 0 and then helping it to run up to 4. Obviously, I shall have to be declaring row and column as well, then bringing in these extra attachments. Well, this happens to be the complete Java program, and upon execution, I shall be getting the same output. So I'm sure that you have now been able to understand the Java code, and not just have you been able to understand the Java code, I'm sure gradually you are realizing that programming is actually not dependent on a programming language. Programming is independent. It is not dependent on any language. Of course, having a hold over a programming language shall definitely be a boost for you to be a good programmer. And here you are noticing that be it the C code or be it the Java code, the logic definitely happens to be the same. Now that you have understood the code with respect to Java, let us move towards Python. In as far as the Python code is concerned, you know that it is this print command that shall be printing a single star. But then in case I need 5 stars in the same line, all that I have to do is to bring in this for loop. Well, here already I have made use of the loop index variable column, and the range happens to be 0 to 4. And also you know that after printing 5 stars, the cursor would still keep blinking on the same line, and hence it's my responsibility to bring the cursor to the new line. And in Python, this is the line of code that shall be bringing in the cursor to the new line. Python happens to be a programming language in which indentation is definitely important. You cannot be having this print command over here. Well, if you will have it here, it means that this print command is inside the loop. Well, you know that I should be having the print command outside the loop, and hence you will have to be indenting it behind like this. Well, all of these nuances of Python, if you'll really have to master, then you will have to be undergoing my course on Python, and you shall be getting the complete clarity. But at this point in time, I'm sure you would agree that it is this piece of code which is going to be printing 5 stars on a single line, and then the cursor shall be coming into the new line. But then you know that I would still not have got a square of stars. So what I'll really have to do is to bring in one more for loop like this. Well, you can already see that in this for loop, I have made use of the loop index variable row, and I'm also specifying the range as 0 to 4. Well, if you'll ask me if this piece of code would work, well, you know that in Python, even without any extra attachments, definitely this piece of code would work, and upon execution, this is what we get on the screen. Oops, no doubt. We have got a square of stars, but then if you notice, what we have is a square of 4 rows and 4 columns. But then I need a square of 5 rows and 5 columns. Well, I'm sure that many of my learners during this coding itself would have anticipated that I am committing a mistake by giving the range as 0 to 4. You know that in Python, the upper limit always has to be incremented by 1 and should be specified. After all, these are the nuances of that particular programming language. In other words, what I really have to tell is that in the outer loop, I should say that the row should be in the range 0 to 5. And then in the inner loop, I should specify that the column should be in the range 0 to 5. And now upon execution, you can notice that I have indeed got a square of 5 stars, and I'm sure now you are able to completely understand this piece of code as well. So I'm sure that in this session, you have indeed been able to understand as to how, by making use of the top 3 programming languages and the for loop that is provided in these languages, that you have been able to construct a square of 5 stars. But then how do we really construct a rectangle of stars? Well, if that is what is your interest, then all that you have to do is to continue watching this video series. Hope this session was informative. Let's meet again in my next session.